Welcome to the Cybersecurity and Compliance Concurrent session at the ELFA Equipment Managers Conference. My name is Andrew Pace. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Asset Compliance Solutions out of Buffalo, New York. Moderating the session. Along with me is Anthony Gordon, Manager of Asset Management at Farm Credit Leasing, and Mike Smith, President and CEO at RTR Services. On our panel today is Greg Meyer, CPA. He is the CFO CIO at ACS, Asset Compliance Solutions. Greg started in 2007. His role has grown over the years. He's a CPA and has over 30 years of experience in a variety of industries. Greg also was a contributing author for a textbook project at Canisius College out of Buffalo, New York. Sponsored related to tech for accountants. To my left, Dan Levin, President and co-founder at Liventus. They're a custom software development firm. Developed in 2002 alongside Sam Oliva as a spinoff from ESC Financial Services. Today, Dan serves as president, where he's responsible for running the overall company. Over the years, Dan has gained significant software development and business competencies in the fintech, financing, and leasing industries. He has programmed and architected complex, high-volume custom software systems that conduct over billions of dollars annually, which also require large cybersecurity compliance and requirements. When he's not in the office, he enjoys spending time with his wife and children, playing guitar, help raising money for causes close to him, including EB research and cancer research. Why are we here? Why do we care about cybersecurity? It protects all categories of data from theft and damage. It includes sensitive data, personally identifiable information, protected health information, personal information, intellectual property data, government and industry information systems. Thinking it won't happen to us is one of the biggest mistakes businesses can make regarding cybersecurity. Some impactful cybersecurity facts and stats. 95% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by human error. Data breaches exposed 36 billion records in the first half of 2020. In the last 15 years, there have been 11,762 recorded breaches. 68% of business leaders feel their cybersecurity risks are increasing. According to IBM, the average cost of a data breach globally in 2021 is $4.24 million. 56% of Americans don't know what steps to take if they were affected by a data breach.
Oh, and I was going to add that I saw a stat today that I was reading an article that said there's over 1 billion forms of malware now, so 1 billion with B, which is kind of nutty when you think about it.
That's scary. Percentages of surveyed organizations compromised by at least one successful attack. Pretty much looking at that slide, the trend is it's only getting worse. Pretty horrific. Greg, can you tell us about a horrific story?
Well, so about 8 years ago, I was actually at this conference, and it was in San Antonio, maybe. I got a call from our office that somebody got a warning that their computer was being encrypted, and they needed to pay 2 bitcoins to the ransomware attacker, whoever that was. And that was that was at the very beginning of when all this was happening. People didn't really hear about it at that point. And fortunately, it didn't really affect us that much because our network was set up so that we had at least privilege access, so that that particular computer didn't have access to anything important. So we didn't really lose anything. But that was a sort of an aha moment at that time when you're away from the office and all of a sudden they're calling you and you don't know what to do. And that was really interesting. The other interesting story, well, there's several, but the most interesting, as it relates probably to you, is we had one of our clients last year had their inventory system was compromised, and they lost a lot of data around that. And we actually had to help them recreate their asset logging of what happened over the past 6 months or so, using all the recovery records that we had. So, and we had to be involved in actually creating a new procedure so that all the documentation couldn't be traced, and they weren't necessarily dependent on the logs that were there either. So it was an interesting thing. And there's a lot more if you want to talk about it later. We can have a beer and trade horror stories on that stuff.
Dan, do you have any?
Yeah, so I've several too that I probably share, but the one I was going to share had to do with, I'd say you can label it horrific because it was something that was really out of our control in the sense that it wasn't a traditional hack. It was an issue where a site that we had was cloned. So you can clone a website pretty easily. You don't need to break in any source code or anything like that. You just create a copy of a site, make it look like that site, and then you just host it, and you just change the domain name just with one letter, right? So that to the end user, they can't really easily tell that it's not the legitimate website. So we had bad actors clone one, and the site I'm talking about, it was in the financial sector and had to deal with a lot of credit card data and personally identifiable information. So these bad actors would take the clone site, they'd host it in Russia and wherever else, and advertise it on Google. So when people searched for the legitimate website that we ran, they would actually end up clicking on the fraudster's site. And when they clicked on the fraudster's site, they would type in, all their personally identifiable information. Unbeknownst to them, they're doing it on a fake site, as well as credit card information. And then they'd be redirected to our legitimate website. They wouldn't think anything of it. They'd put all that data in again in our site, and then it would work. And so there's a few horrific things about it. Was that, one being it was completely out of our control in the sense that we couldn't stop it from happening immediately. Sometimes a hack happens and you can, you think of the most dramatic case, unplug wires, right? You can't really do that. So we're kind of sitting on the sidelines watching this happen. It took us a couple weeks to figure out what was even going on because tracing through all of the data, we couldn't figure out how this information was being so quickly exposed. And it was horrific in the sense that in order to take it down, we had to work with foreign government, foreign registrars and hosting providers that aren't known to necessarily want to work with us, and also Google, and explaining, hey, these are the fake websites, not us. So there's a lot of different ways that cyber criminals can get data. It's not always just trying to break down a wall or trying to break into a system.
Thank you, Dan. Mike, did you have a horror story, sir?
Not so much a horror story, but just how innocent things can happen. There's a local company out in Oregon that, they left their remote access portal open, and it's just a flip of a switch on a computer screen where it times out after a certain time, and they didn't do it. And they ended up, somebody, cruising the internet looking for portals that are open. Down theirs went in, used malware, and cost them $40,000, and they lost a couple days of production. So just a simple toggle of a switch can have an immediate impact on your business if you don't have an IT group that is very diligent about making sure you're protected.
Thank you. As you can see on the slide here, over the last 10 years or so, these are some of the most impactful cybersecurity attacks. December 2013, target 110 million records. Equifax, one of the largest credit reporting agencies, 140 million records were breached, hacked. Breach cost them almost $4 billion in September 2017. Another one that we're all familiar with, SolarWinds, December 2020. 18,000 companies affected, only 40 companies targeted and compromised, but the estimated insurance losses of the attack were estimated to be about $90 million. Greg, do any of these attacks stick out to you?
Well, The first thing I wanted to say was that I think I have a lifetime of credit monitoring now from all the times my email address has been involved in something. It seems like you get a letter every 6 months or so that you've got a free year of credit monitoring, so I don't think I have to pay for that for a long time now. But those are useful things to do. But the one that affected our business in the past year was the Colonial Pipeline, actually. We're in the recovery business of assets, and when the Colonial Pipeline was shut down, there were some jobs going on in the southeast of the country that some of the agents we had working on the jobs couldn't get fuel to be able to complete the job. So the ripples of that went far beyond the vacationers that got stuck on the beach because they couldn't get gas to get out of the Carolinas there. And it really had an impact even at that level with, for us, just trying to do business. So that was an interesting recent attack.
Dan, there's some big ones there. Any thoughts on ones that you see on the slideshow?
I always talk about Target because it's kind of an oldie but a goodie, in the sense that it happened now 8 years ago, and we're so many companies are still vulnerable in the same degree that Target was. So you take Target, and they're a pretty big company. They have a pretty big, they had a pretty strong security posture at the time. Not good enough, but you would think that they had a pretty decent one given their size, and they did. And they got breached the same way that Home Depot did, almost exactly, which isn't even on here. And it's similar to how SolarWinds became so big, and that's because they had, so they had a pretty strong company from a security standpoint, but you're only as strong as your weakest link, which is a cliche, right? But you always hear it, and it's very true in this regard. So Target had an HVAC company that had access to their network, right? So they had a third-party vendor that had access to the network. Why exactly, I can't remember. But these criminals, these cyber criminals, they're patient and they're smart, and they really play the long game. So they actually, no pun intended, they targeted the HVAC company, and they waited on, and they got malware on the HVAC company's system, and they just waited until they logged into Target's network. They waited a month, or it might have even been longer. And once they got the credentials to Target's network, then it was kind of free game, right? Because they don't even need elevated privileges at that point. Once they're in the system, they can, find their way around. And what they did was they found the source code to the point of sale systems in the Target stores, and on Black Friday and the following several weeks after that, they installed malware on many point-of-sale systems in the stores. And so in a very short amount of time, they did, $50 or $100 million and 100 million records of damage in a very short period of time. Home Depot actually had almost the same exact issue happen, and they went 6 months before identifying it. And similarly, SolarWinds went almost a year without identifying the malware in their source code. So you take, just to recap, you take a big company, strong security posture, but they have one weak link, and that one weak link didn't have strong security posture. They get targeted, they get hacked, and it causes severe damage. So one little thing really snowballs into something crazy.
Thank you. Yeah, one little oops can ruin a lot of data boys, right? So, the actors behind the attacks and their motivation. Greg, why are bad actors going after you or some of the folks in our audience here today?
Well, the obvious one is money. They're looking for a ransom payment. Those are the ones that make the news in a lot of ways. Stealing credit cards, but it could be something as simple as a competitor trying to steal a secret from you for some technology you've developed, or you're hearing a lot about Ukraine now, Russia and Ukraine, the nation state action that's going on. A lot of the Ukrainian government websites have been defaced, probably by Russian actors. So those are big deals. North Korea is famous for trying to hack into banking system around the world to try to get access to funds because they're under such severe sanctions. So those are probably, I mean, there's a ton of different ways. There's the kid in the basement that's trying to do it just because he can, and they're pretty smart kids that are out there these days, so.
And Dan, from a software developer's perspective, why would they be going after you? Any of these stick out?
So it's incredibly important to understand why, what is motivating these people, and it's a step toward the preventative mindset instead of the reactive mindset, when you can understand what the motivations are. And it's definitely human nature to assume it's financial, like Greg was saying, and it really is. I mean, I don't know the statistic, but I think it's over 85% are financially motivated. But to Greg's point, there is a set of people they're not cyber criminals yet, and they kind of stumble upon a vulnerability. They stumble upon something that they can take advantage of. And they have two options, right? They can take the cyber criminal path and become a career criminal, or they can actually help your company. And that brings up the importance of a vulnerability disclosure program, which is becoming increasingly popular in large organizations, and any organization, which you're essentially publishing a program that allows people who find vulnerabilities to report them, see something, say something. And so you're giving them an easy option to take the good path instead of the other one. And it could be with rewards. You can work with them, they can help you resolve it. And so those are definitely becoming increasingly popular. But I mean, there's a lot of different motivations, there's a lot of different reasons these people are doing this. And if you can understand why your business may be at risk, why someone might be motivated to attack your business, that's going to be huge in understanding and understanding how to prevent cybercrime to your business.
Thank you. There's so many types of attacks, and we touched on some already. What should we be most concerned with, Greg?
The thing that, as a service provider, that I struggle with the most is protecting information. So, all of our procedures and mitigation efforts are around trying to make sure that the information that our lender clients provide to us doesn't get lost out in the to a criminal attack or anything like that. So we spend a lot of time trying to protect that information in a general sense. Information is important, we need it to get the job done, but we want to make sure that it's not accessible to people that don't need it either, so.
How hard is that to do?
I'm sorry?
How hard is that to do? I know it's a general question, but
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some mitigation things that I'm actually probably going to talk about in the next slides too, that you focus on having good firewall hardware, protecting that data so that there are no vulnerabilities in it. It's keeping your infrastructure up to date so that you don't have software running old versions of Windows around that don't have updates applied to them. Training your people so that, we're jumping the gun a little bit here as we get going, but training your people to make sure that they're aware of seeing something suspicious, and it's just it's a group effort too on all those things. You have to do all that kind of stuff. I sort of stole Dan's thunder there a little bit. I think we were going to talk a little bit about more of the specific things, but just from a service provider, it's protecting that information that's the most important thing. It's not even the loss of functionality from being able to perform, because we have ways of performing our service without the computer if we had to, but we don't want that information. We don't want to be the headline for a bank client that's lost a lot of data because we're working on it. So you probably can elaborate more on the specifics.
Yeah, Dan, so other than indigestion and heartburn, what else keeps you up at night as far as these attacks are concerned?
My kids keep me up at night. So there's a lot of different things on the board here, and IP theft, information theft, personal data loss. It starts, for the most part, I guess, if I had to put one thing on there, I'd say it's malware. As a software developer, I can tell you malware is pretty easy to develop. I said a second, a few minutes ago, that there's over 1 billion types of malware out there, and in the web circulating, and that's probably 20 years now worth of malware. And malware, is just software that's out there to do damage or steal data, right? And so ransomware is a form of malware, viruses are a form of malware, spyware, and if you have malware, or if you have had malware, your personal information is 100% at risk. Other things that keep me up at night, and we've heard a lot about deep fakes, that those are becoming, increasingly popular, and I think the future will show a lot more issues and attacks related to deep fakes. IoT devices are a huge threat right now that's not up there. So if you think about any device you have in your house that Alexa can talk to, or just any kind of Internet of Thing, everything from your light switches to your smart TVs to your Wi-Fi coffee machine or your Wi-Fi printer. I mean, take your smart TV for example, which these devices, IoT devices, the software that's put on them are not known to be secure. They don't put effort into security in these devices, and you're installing them on your home networks and even your office networks. And so they're very easy to hack into. You take your smart TV that's hanging on your wall, and chances are it has a camera embedded in it that you don't even know about, and I'd say 95% it's got a microphone. It's very easy to take these devices over and spy on you, right? Know when you leave your house, know when you are home, know when you're not at home. That's kind of a horror movie in and of itself when you talk about horror stories. So that's something that definitely keeps me up at night too. If the Wi-Fi coffee machine that you bought just so you can tell Alexa to make you a coffee now all of a sudden is the doorway into your entire home internet and into your entire home network. That's pretty freaky. So one thing you can do for that, to not lose sleep, is segment all these devices off a segmented network at your house. So you can have 2 different Wi-Fi networks, one for these IoT devices and a separate network for the computer that you're doing your banking on. And then mobile devices are also, with COVID, work from home, everyone's using their personal devices to connect to the office, to connect to office networks and office email. These personal devices, these mobile devices are, it's becoming increasingly more popular to get malware on those and to get software installed on those mistakenly by you, or maybe even from your kid, that you don't know about, and that's a huge threat to you and your personal data and the data at work, and you can read emails, and it's every time you install software on your mobile device, it's human nature just to click okay when it says, hey, can I access your photos, can I access your location, can I access whatever. Make sure you say no. There's no reason for the game that your kid downloaded to access all your personal data on your phone. And so when you multiply that across every employee that has a personal device that's connecting to your office, think of the threats that are living out there. So there's a lot of them. Sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you. Tony, from a leasing, from a bank and leasing perspective, what are some things what are some of these threats that keep you up?
Well, I would say the most common attack on the bank is wire transfer fraud. And this fraud is usually perpetrated by hackers that are using social engineering or phishing, or some of the other methods of gathering personal information that would grant the attacker access to somebody's personal information. So it's not always the bank that's being attacked, it's the bank's customer. And through this attack, they're learning who the banker is, where the accounts are held, and then they're going in through and having enough information to make contact with the bank to initiate a bank wire. They'll have passwords, they'll have account numbers, a lot of information that's been achieved or obtained through these methods. So that's the most common attack that I see coming through the bank today.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Greg, on this next slide here, what are the most common mistakes that businesses make?
So you asked
We
the
touched
question,
on it.
yeah, you asked the question about what do you do about it, but like, part of it is like, there's some basic mistakes that a lot of businesses will make with doing things, and one of them is not keeping their software up to date. Banks are probably famous for still running Windows XP on some computers around. I have some friends in the banking industry that they joke that it takes so much to upgrade the operating systems in some of these things that that they have all these old things running. Now, I know obviously a bank is going to have some higher levels of security and put some other mitigating factors in place around that, but a lot of small businesses, they buy a computer and they let it sit there for 5 years and they don't ever do anything with it, and it can be a real source of a headache for that, because these malware programs and these things try to take advantage of vulnerabilities in those operating systems.
So the new operating systems are designed with patches?
Yeah, they'll close all those things up.
They're also constantly patching them, so once the old systems go out of support, and once they go out of support, they're not continuing to patch vulnerabilities that are known to exist. So it's kind of like gold for a hacker if they come across Windows 2012 operating system. They know how to take it over. They know how to get into it and do anything. So it's simple.
Isn't that part of the reason why a lot of the software are going to monthly subscriptions, where you get those updates all the time and you just continue to pay, versus 10, 15 years ago, you get a CD, you're good for 5 or 6 years, or as long as you can milk that software.
It's certainly it's one of the benefits. I mean, I'd say that the main motivation behind that's money.
Yeah.
But it's a huge benefit, right? I mean,
It forces those updates.
It forces the updates, and they want to update that software. They don't want to be known for their software getting hacked. And every software is made by humans. Humans have flaws. All software is flawed. Microsoft software is flawed. Google's, Apple's, everybody's software is flawed. So they want an easy way to continue to push updates, and more cloud-based software is definitely.
So I have a question about that. I think we're also running on time soon. So we've seen attacks against the FBI and government installations and significant systems that have great investment behind them, and a lot of monitoring have been attacked. And we've seen that FBI had an attack just a few months ago on their systems. Now, having seen that, what worries me is as we migrate more of our applications to cloud services, could these artificially intelligence-driven actors with ransomware as a service and some significant tools at their disposal that we all have for good is also available for that, use that same power computing to come and take down our cloud services? And how safe are we on the cloud side of it? Because in our personal domains, environments, we can do all kinds of things, and be as serious as unplugging devices if we want to do, or disconnecting from the network at night, or do certain things. But on the cloud, I feel so much more exposed sometimes, hoping that, are those guys secure with that kind of power that's in some hands out there.
Yeah.
So some of my comments on there, because you had a lot in there, but so some of my comments are, yes, you're still vulnerable being in the cloud, and I would even say maybe you're potentially more vulnerable being in the cloud. Not because you're in the cloud, because people don't know how to configure the cloud properly. There's quite honestly a significant amount of very advanced tools that you can use in the cloud to really be preventative, right? And so the object is to get away from being event-driven, which is your IT department chasing alerts and chasing hacks and putting out fires, and being more intelligent, insightful, analytical, data-driven, where you can predict the threats that are going to come. And a lot of that computing power and intelligence and those systems do live in the cloud. So you do want to take advantage of a lot of things that are in the cloud, but cloud is new. and there's not a lot of people that necessarily know how to configure it well. And they don't understand the different tools that they should or shouldn't be using, and it's expensive. So people that just do a lift and shift to the cloud, chances are, if they don't know what they're doing, they are less secure, maybe than they once were. But I would say the idea of just being in the cloud is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. There's a lot of tools that you can use to really be more preventative. But Target was breached 8 years ago from third-party vendors not being secure. There's still people all over the place not learning from the mistakes made 8 to 10 years ago. So we're constantly in a game of cat and mouse where, from a cybersecurity point of view, we're trying to always catch up to the cyber criminals. And I'm looking forward to the day when we're ahead of them, but I don't know when that's going to be. But the cloud is a useful tool for, I'd say, a lot of people. I don't know if that's helpful.
It's very interesting because when I first started with ACS, one of the things I was doing was we were developing a new version of their workflow software, and at the time the cloud was just coming out, and all of the clients, as we were talking about how to configure our server setup, didn't want us anywhere near the cloud. The banks were scared of it at that time. They wanted us to have our own server and so on. And now, as we have developed a new version of it, the minute we say we're hosted on Amazon Web Services, everybody that we talk to in the bank compliance departments breathe a sigh of relief, because I think it comes down to a configuration issue. There's so many more resources and technologies available at these big data centers that can help you configure it properly so that you are going to be safe. Versus if I tried to do that on a server in my own office, the opportunities for misconfiguration in that scenario of not having access to incredibly bright network engineers and people that are involved in it, that are hired by Amazon to do that kind of stuff.
But my point was, the bigger the opportunity, the bigger the target, right?
Right.
And I use that the FBI as an example.
Yep.
Assuming they had some of those resources or engaged some of those resources, and they got hacked. So they're saying, if they got hacked, AWS or Azure or anything else, Google's cloud.
The bigger the target, the bigger the,
Yeah,
you're always going to have that problem.
opportunity for the bad guys
Right.
to go after, because once they're in there, they have access to a lot of it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No one's impenetrable, and I guess we're jumping ahead, but we're kind of short on time too. I'd say that CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, right? They came out. They used to say, they used to give you best practices to follow, right? And they still do. And they used to say you should be doing X, Y, Z all the time, right? ABC, X, Y, Z, do all these things to strengthen your posture. And not a lot of people were listening. And so instead they changed their messaging and they said, out of all the data that we have access to, we're able to tell that the 3 biggest reasons people are getting breached and hacked and whatever you want to call it, come down to these 3 things. So if you're not going to follow all these best practices, just don't do these 3 things, because these are the 3 things that are still causing, I don't know the statistic, but it was 80+%. Weak passwords, single-factor authentication, and my favorite, because I'm in the software development industry, is using outdated systems. Those are the 3 biggest things that are still causing a lot of these breaches today. Weak passwords, single-factor authentication, and outdated systems, which is mind-boggling to think about, because these are easy fixes. These are things that have been, we could have fixed many years ago. Just jumping back to the cloud for a second, you kind of have no choice in the next few years, because talk about outdated systems, these, getting on-prem type of software is not going to be any easier or even an option, 10 years down the road. So eventually you do have to probably shift to the cloud.
With that great threat looming over it.
I would say that I think this is a much cooler and deeper discussion, but I think that there's probably arguments that say Your bigger threats are your employees, your bigger threats are, you know, weak passwords and not two-factor authentication and using weak systems for critical, or using old systems for critical systems. Just being in the cloud doesn't necessarily make you a target necessarily. And the feds, you know, they're gonna get hacked too, just because, you know, just because the feds doesn't mean that they're doing everything right.
It's just that, I think it's a matter of time before we see some significant cloud-based action.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. So, some best practices for building a cybersecurity compliance plan. Obviously, we talked about the obvious ones: education, training for companies to implement, to help with their security posture. Dan, I know you talk a lot, but what else can they do?
I would say create, and this goes into mistakes that I've also seen. I mean, creating a strategy is huge. Creating a strategy from the top down, this is not an IT problem, this is a company problem. Your cybersecurity is a team sport, and it can't be done in a vacuum, and it can't be passed off to IT. So this has to come from, the strategy piece has to come from, you know, the executive team. Cyber insurance, I bet, you know, 50% of companies out there don't have it, or think they have it, and they don't have the right cyber insurance. Is something that you can definitely look at. That's you know, not to give insurance companies more money, but that's an easy win. Training, I know we've talked about training is huge. Train your employees. We do it every 2 weeks. There's programs like Know Before and Proofpoint that will give them, you know, 20 minutes of awareness training. I think you mentioned it, or you were going to mention the phishing that it does. When developing, you know, if you're developing software, there's a number of ways to make that secure in terms of dynamic and static code testing, implementing penetration tests, implement secure code training, again, not training, but different types of training, security audits, you know, pick a compliance is one of my favorites too that I think companies can do. You might not have to be compliant. You might not have a compliance that your company needs to follow. Doesn't mean you can't open one up and start checking off boxes to make you stronger, because whether it's PCI or SOC or HIPAA, there's a lot of overlap, and they are all going to make you stronger. So pick one. You might already be doing 20% of it. 50% of it might be some low-hanging fruit that you can implement. It might make you a lot stronger. Maybe 10% doesn't apply to you, and maybe whatever my math examples were, maybe that last 20% or whatever that is, you know, you work on it over a year or two with a strategy, with you know, figuring out how to just implement things that are going to make you stronger. So those are all things in 20 seconds or less that I think you can do.
I mean, I think I would, it's always a trade-off between convenience and security, right? Like, people who work for a large bank, you've got key fobs, and you have to send out encrypted emails and all this stuff that goes on. And some of it's a pain in the ass, excuse my language, but there's a reason for that, because the harder it is to do those things, the harder it is to steal the information or to hack into something. But there's a trade-off. You have to find that balance between what's secure and what's convenient to get business done too. The only other things I wanted to just throw out here, just in my closing remark, would be to talk about, like, there's probably 2 other areas from a portfolio management or equipment management standpoint that would be important, and that is, are the vendors you're working with going to be in business? Are they addressing these things because of the, if they can't operate and provide the service to you, that's an important thing. That's one of the reasons why this stuff is important to somebody that isn't necessarily an IT person, but is just trying to get a job done. But I think there's risk in the portfolios that are out there too, because if one of your borrowers is unable to operate, you might not be able to collect the loan payment on a piece of equipment if their business has been hacked and so on. So I think it's good for lenders to be talking to their borrowers about, the customers about these things, to make sure that they're operating a good business and can maintain the continuity of their business and and reduce the risk of the bank, or the portfolio, or the risk in the portfolio from those kinds of things too, so.
Thanks, Larry. Mike, what else can,
I mean, most of it's already covered, but I mean, some of the low-hanging fruit things that have, I think, the best impact on an organization is to do anti-phish, where you send emails out to your staff and try and identify who's clicking on it, how far down that rabbit hole they went, and you get a nice report on that shows you some of the vulnerabilities and where you need training specifically within your organization. Requiring consistent password changes. For our organizations, every 40 days, they have to change their password. Keeping your systems up to date is to me one of the most critical areas, because as a service provider, I think that, like Greg said, we're protecting our clients' data. And that's one of the frontline easy things to do in an organization, is to keep your software up to date. And then implementing a second level authentication and engaging that with your staff. So when they sign in, there's a second level of authentication that has to take place. And there's easy technology out there that you can contract with or engage. It's not huge, but it definitely makes a difference in protecting the organization.
all right, well, I'd like to thank our panel, Greg, Dan flew in today from Chicago, thank you very much, and Tony and Mike, thank you for moderating. Enjoy the rest of the conference and safe travels home. Thank you.